Welcome to part 6 of why all rapture prophecies and predictions always fail. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to be Peter Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. So why do rapture prophecies and predictions fail? Well, as we have been discussing, they are formed based upon faulty methods of interpretation. In other words, they're just not reading the plain reading of Scripture. And thus they form their own opinions. They insert their own ideas and thoughts, into the text that's not stated. So we've been breaking down the prophecies, actually going to the prophecies, looking at the prophecies. So how do they come up with their conclusions? And some of them we haven't particularly went into. I'm looking at the scriptures themselves, but some of them come up with wild methods, such as numbers, using numbers. If you got 2,000 days and all kinds of stuff, then again, you're reading that into the text. You're reading that into the text. So, I'm trying to think which way I want to go here. Let's do this. Here we go. Remember our artist rendition? And by the way, I rarely find people really talking about this prophetic dream, this actual prophetic dream. What this tells us, and remember this was found, we studied this in Daniel chapter 2. The dream that God gave King Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel interpreted, which gave a prophetic picture from Nebuchadnezzar's time until the second coming of Jesus. So right up until the second coming, that's the prophetic picture that we have. And so you have, and this is important, 5 world dominating kingdoms that will rule over all the earth. So 5 in our day to date, 4 of these kingdoms have already come and gone. There's one kingdom left, and as you can see, there was the head of gold, which was Babylon, chest and arms of silver, which was the Medes and Persians, the belly and thighs of bronze, which was the ancient Grecian kingdom under Alexander the Great, and then the Roman kingdom, the empire of Rome, the legs of iron. So those kingdoms have already come and gone, and there's one kingdom left that will rule the earth, and that is that of the feet in iron of clay. We don't know the name of it, even though I know in this artist rendition here, they have the restored Rome. That's just kind of their opinion. Now, Daniel did say that in the days of the kingdoms of the feet of iron and clay, which has 10 toes, which represents 10 kings that will give their authority under one ruler. People call him the Antichrist, which in reality, the Bible does not call him the Antichrist. Certainly he is an Antichrist, but the Bible doesn't call him an Antichrist. The Bible calls him a beast, the son of perdition, the man of sin, and he will rule the earth. and then Jesus will come. So what you saw in this vision, this dream, was that in the days of this kingdom, the feet of iron and clay, a rock cut out from a mountain, not made with hands, strike this human form at his feet. And remember, that indicates the time, because the rock could have destroyed the human form at hitting it anywhere. So if it hit it in his chest, in his head, in its legs, it still could have destroyed the image, this human form or man's time that God has allowed it. And then he will conclude by setting up his kingdom. We know when this is going to happen. We know when this happened, and we can put a timeline to it given certain events, so that we know that this kingdom will be ruled in Daniel's 70th week or last week, and the ruler of the kingdom, the man of sin, the beast, will establish a 7-year covenant, and he will break that covenant in the middle of the week. And then this week will conclude with Jesus coming and then destroying the kingdoms of the earth. This image will never again rise upon the earth, but Jesus' kingdom will fill the earth and will never end. Okay? What is interesting is how we can track prophetically. We can locate prophetically where we are in this. So remember this, if you want to know how the world is going to end, it's going to end with the rock, not with nuclear destructions, climate control, all that kind of stuff. That's not how the world is going to end. Now, that's not to say that man can't do damage. That's not to say some maniac gets a hold of a nuclear bomb, pushes it, and it strikes someplace in the earth. That's not to say that can't happen. But we know that the kingdoms of the world will exist until Jesus takes them out. So we do know that. And Jesus says, when you see the abomination that makes desolation, that is the 3.5-year mark of the 70th week of Daniel. So we know when the tribulation period begins, 7 years later, Jesus will come. This rock will strike. Jesus will come. We know that. All right. So, let's go back. I think I'm going to move on from here. Okay. Let me go back to Matthew 24. And I think we got enough where we can say, so what I want to do, because I'm going to read now and go through again Matthew 24. And then what we will do is kind of go through the events that will lead up to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now we can plug in all of the other verses that we have read. Okay. So with that, I'm just going to mention them. If you go to parts 1 through 5, you will see a lot of detail that we gave, a lot of scriptures that we gave. You can find them there. I will mention them, okay? So I'm going to go back as I started here. And then this is actually chapter 23 in verse 37, that says this: Jerusalem, Jerusalem, she who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, yet you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. Now, remember, our subject is why rapture predictions and rapture prophecies fail. We just came out of one of these major, I'm calling it major or newsworthy, failed rapture prophecy September 23rd and 24th. Okay. We are going over the actual scriptures that if you wanted to make an intelligent conclusion, you ought to be reading these prophecies accurately. Don't read into them, okay? Don't insert things in there. Certainly, now in the olden days, we don't see this too much, but I used to hear people would say, you don't have a newspaper in one hand and then reading the prophecies in the others. That's a grave mistake. Nowadays, it's social media. I'll say a phone. I don't have a phone connected to social media or the internet, news headlines. I had seen over the years, I've been Christian for 47 years, over 47 years, and I can tell you that there have, when you have these kind of headlines, people always plug in predictions. I remember when Ronald Reagan, people said he was the Antichrist because his name, I think it's Ronald Wilson Reagan, something like that, 6 letters, 666. People seriously was worried about Ronald Reagan. And then, of course, there was Gorbachev, the president of the Soviet Union at the time. He had a birthmark on his head, and there it is, the mark of the beast, even though, again, just so much silliness. And then, back then, this is in the 80s, people were saying how Russia was going to attack Israel. Game over. Gog and Magog, as talked about in Ezekiel, I believe it's around 36, 37, 38, I think in 39, around those chapters. Those are very good chapters. We didn't get into them, but those are very important chapters. Again, understanding end time events. Okay. And then you every time something newsworthy would happen, people attach, well, we're in the end of the days. Well, let's kind of go over this again. Let's kind of rehearse this again. Because again, these are the questions that you ought to ask. And and I could show you headlines in, for example, on Facebook, headlines in there where people certainly will say, for example, Jerusalem, right? That that America, that we're supposed to support Israel no matter what, because if you don't support Israel, you're going to be cursed by God, right? And I know that one of the famous pastors who unswervingly supported Israel and pleaded with America never ever to turn their back on Israel. The problem with that, and let me just say this to be clear, I would agree. Don't turn your back on Israel. But that's, and again, but a lot of times this is in a sense not what they are advocating. Like when you look at Israel today, and I ask this question and I never ever get an answer. I never get an answer. And the faulty premise is that in 1948, when Israel reunified or unified, that was the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Okay, that was the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So then I'm asking the question, how? A lot of questions, and I know it's unpopular to ask the questions, but are the people occupying the land today, are they the descendants of Abraham? Okay. Now, I don't know if they can answer that, because one way you can answer that is through genealogies. Without a doubt, 1948 wasn't a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. It wasn't. So if this is one of the faulty premises where you saw people who would then try to calculate and make rapture predictions. Because they said, well, when you see Israel become a nation, the Bible never said that, but when you see Israel become a nation, then that generation that sees Israel becoming a nation will not pass until the Lord comes. First and foremost, that's not what he says. Now, I'm kind of jumping ahead. Let's kind of go back and let's rehearse. So in verse 37, this is Jesus' last public words to Israel. His last public words. Okay, watch this. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, she who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, yet you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. Now, this is Jesus' last words to Israel. And by the way, up until that time, you could see all of the people that were occupying Israel had genealogies that they could trace back to Abraham. So now, when he says your house is left to you desolate, this again would come to pass in AD 70. And then since that time, nearly 2,000 years, the land was desolate. So notice what Jesus said then. You will not see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. If God was doing something in Israel, certainly it was not something that Jesus had fulfilled, because two things. They didn't see him, but also did the nation, or did Israel say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. Did Israel say that? So that's, again, it's a question. Did Israel say that? He who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. All right, so then as Jesus left, he was going out of the temple complex. His disciples came up and called his attention to the temple buildings. And he replied, don't you see all these things? I assure you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down. So then again, prophecy came to pass in AD 70. Okay. He says, while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately and said, tell us, when will these things happen? And what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So we have been talking about these three questions. When will these things happen? The destruction of the temple. What is the sign of your coming? Answer that. And then of the end of the age. And remember, we define the age. What does that mean? The end of the age. Now you hear this is such a common phrase. The end of the world. Now they won't say, okay. You could let me see if the King James says this here. But anyway, the end of the age. I'm going to see, I'm only just so you can know, but it's a common phrase, right? That people will say. I think the New King James says age too, but it might be the King James. But anyway, but it's a common phrase, the end of the world, end of the age. But what did that mean? Now, to some people in their mind, it means a lot of other things. Even when you think about Armageddon, what does Armageddon mean? Right? When you think about the term apocalypse, what did that mean? Well, the secular world has butchered the name. But to be more concise, the end of the age is when Jesus comes and seizes control of the earth, okay, and puts an end to man's rule on earth. That's the end of the age. Then Jesus replied to them, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alone, because these things must take place. But what? The end is not yet. So what does Jesus mean by the end? Well, we said that the end of the age, the end of man's time, right? Verse 7, for nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these events are the beginnings of birth pains. Then they will hand you over for persecution. They will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will take offense, betray one another, hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, because lawlessness will multiply. The love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end, right, to the end, will be delivered. And then he says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. And then what? The end will come. So again, what is this end? The end is when Jesus comes. And then, of course, what Jesus does to facilitate that, the end. I want to come back to this verse later because it's very important. Because remember, I said that we are using as foundational passages Matthew 24, but I also said Ephesians 2, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we will shortly. Verse 15 says, so when you see the abomination that causes desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. So now, let the reader understand. Now, we just kind of, in the last study, we saw the man of sin, the ruler of the last kingdom that is to come. We saw him, the ruler of the last kingdom. Okay? The man of sin, the beast. Okay? So we read Daniel 9. We saw what this abomination that caused this desolation. So when this in the middle of this 7-year covenant he breaks. He then goes on a devastation. Okay. And then he says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. And it's referring to Israel, remember. This abomination that called the desolation is set in the prophecies, the 70 weeks of Daniel that he says that are decreed against the Jewish people, Jerusalem, and the temple. So, okay. That's why he then says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on a housetop must not come down to get his things out of the house, and a man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Let me stop. This is what this is not talking about, the rapture. In other words, nowhere so far have we seen the rapture of the church, the body of Christ. Okay, so he's talking about events, prophetic events that's going to happen with Israel. Verse 21, for at that time there will be great tribulation. So now you hear people talking about the tribulation period, and it is a period of time known as the day of the Lord. So these events proceed, Jesus coming, concluding with Jesus coming. But it is a time you can read about some of these events in Revelations chapters 6 through 19, where you see where God unleashes its judgments on earth. So he says, for at that time there would be great tribulation, the kind that hadn't taken place from the beginning of the world. Now get that, the beginning of the world. And what does the term world mean? Again, it means the man's time or the age in which man exists. I want to say the sinful age. So from the beginning of the world until now and never will again, unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days would be limited because of the elect. Now this word elect here means it was referring to the Jewish people. So the word elect is a word that is used in different ways or different applications. The word itself simply means chosen ones. So we do see elect used by the New Testament writers. Okay, the chosen ones, the elect, okay. So the question is that the elect means chosen ones. We also see elect, used of Israel in the Old Testament. So again, the context determines what the word elect means. Okay. Now we know here, I'll come back to this word in a moment. He says, if anyone tells you then, look, here is the Messiah, or over here, do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets. Now remember, we said these, again, why do these prophecies fail? False messiahs and false prophecies, faulty methods of interpretations will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, again, even the elect. So let me show you one thing, because remember the context here is Jesus showing, the context is Jesus showing, I got to find this. So I want you to see that the word elect as it is used in the Old Testament. And oh dear. Let me see if this is what I'm looking for. No, let's see. Let me do it this way. because I want you to see here, I want us to keep a lot of people, again, sort of, I think they falsely mistaken uh, uh, okay, so let me see if I can just see one verse here, because uh, oh man, okay. Doo, doo, doo. All right, so now there's another use of the word elect, and again, we're not going to get into that. Calvinists use the word elect, okay, for different reasons, but um, let's do it this way. Um, let's see if I can come this way. Oh, here we go. I forget sometimes when you type in stuff that you have to be very specific. So let's see if this is the verse that I'm looking for, because it's going to spell out. Um, it's going to spell out what I'm looking at here, and you will see why I'm going through this. No, that's not the one I'm looking for. Okay, let's see. I should have uh, did this, but to my shame, I did not do that. All right, hold on. I'm going to do this here. All right, I found the verse I'm looking at. I'm only going to share one verse, okay? But just to kind of, I'm sharing this to kind of show you the, in terms of when we use the word elect, what it means, the different applications. But watch this. This is Isaiah chapter 45. Isaiah chapter 45. And let's look at verse 4. He says, "For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel my elect." Okay? Israel my elect. Now, there is one, I'm not going to get into it. I'm just going to mention it. And let me just say this. You may have to just trust me to. All right. So when he says, down to verse 22, he says, "Unless in those days were limited, no one would survive, but in those days they would be limited because of my elect." So the question is, in context, who is elect here? Well, who we've been talking about all along, remember? When you see the abomination that caused desolation, flee to Judea. He's talking to Israel. This prophecy is about Israel. The 70-week prophecy, remember, was about the Jewish people, Jerusalem, and the temple. Okay, so let's go back. All right, so verse 25 again, "For false messiah, false prophecy, prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect," meaning Israel again. It's not talking about the church or the body of Christ or Christians. Take note, I've told you in advance, so if they tell you, "Look, here in the wilderness, don't go out. He is in the wilderness, don't go out. He is in the inner room, don't believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the carcass is, the vultures will be gathered." Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. So immediately after this 7-year period, this great tribulation, immediately after the tribulation, The sun would be dark and the moon would not shed its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the celestial powers would be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn, and then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from the one end of the sky to the other. So again, who is the elect here? The elect is Israel. This is what this context that he's been talking about. This is not talking about the church. Now, this is what I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to take the time to go there because I don't have to hunt it down. Okay. But the Bible talks about in the Old Testament, even God says that Israel has been scattered, and then at some point he is going to gather them from the four winds. He's going to search for them. He's going to fish for them and gather his elect back into the land. So when he says that he will send his angels, we haven't gotten to it yet. We will. But when it comes to the rapture, Jesus is personally coming for the church. He's not sending his angels. And that's going to be the major difference. I'll come back to this and show you this later. And then he says, now learn this parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branches becomes tender and sprout its leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. I assure you, this generation will certainly not pass until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. I'm just going to read the first sentence here. Now, concerning the day, that day and an hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, except the Father only. I'll read the next verse 37. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. And so then he goes on and to describe the events of the what? The second coming of Jesus. What is important to understand is that this here is not talking about the rapture. But even if you thought it was, or even when you look at the events here, how people arrive at their rapture predictions, as we have studied, are all wrong. This is talking about the prophecies. And if you remember that I read certain prophecies concerning Israel being returned to their land, this is within Joel. I mean, Joel chapter 2, Joel chapter 3. Okay? And that's important because I could literally go through a myriad of scriptures that point to that. And let me see if I can see this before I close out for this. And I think it's Joel chapter 3. Here it is. So Joel chapter 3 says, for behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. We kind of went into that. And notice what he says right here. And now we're in the judgment with them there on the account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. And they have divided up my land. They have cast lots for my people. Now, I just want to just kind of show you that what Matthew here is referring to when he gets to the abomination that makes desolation, he tells them, when you see the abomination that makes desolation. So now that's the prophecies. These prophecies are yet to be fulfilled about when you see the abomination that makes desolation. We haven't seen that. So that kingdom, the feet of iron and clay, that kingdom is yet to come. So we will But so those prophecies have a certain context in which we need to understand them. That you cannot use Matthew 24. You cannot use a lot of the Old Testament prophecies to even talk about what is going on in the church. I will get into that next time in part 7. But all right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in part 7.